It's quite amazing to see so many people here at an event that 4 years ago Pamela thought would fit in the front half of the McDonald's Institute seminar room in archaeology. But it's a real pleasure on behalf of the entire Personal Histories team to welcome Sir David. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. This is a bit of a surprise to me. I thought I was being invited to talk in a reminiscent way to half a dozen people about the early days of television and archaeology on television. However, I am very flattered that you should be here. I joined BBC Television in 1952 in October. I can't say I did it as the end of a culmination of a lifelong ambition, because the plain fact of the matter was that actually I had never seen television. Mind you, I was not in a minority. The bulk of the British public hadn't seen television in 1952. It came, all programs were live, and they came from two small studios up in North London, Alexandra Palace, which in fact was the place where the first public service, or the first public broadcasting system in the world had its basis, that is to say, the BBC. The BBC was avowedly and unashamedly interested in spreading information in those days, and to do so in a way which would attract people who were not sure that they wanted to imbibe any information. And the head of our department, who bizarrely was called the head of talks, another distinguished woman, Mary Adams, had cooked up this program in which you assembled three experts, primarily archaeologists, it has to be said, but anthropologists too, and presented them with objects. There was a chairman who was supposed to give points, and it was supposed to be a challenge from the museum that had presented these objects to these experts. Prominent among them was Sir Mortimer Wheeler, who archaeologists among you will know very well as one of the great pioneering archaeologists of the 20th century, with excavated in Maiden Castle and many other places too. And Sir Mortimer got hold of this idea very quickly, and Sir Mortimer was something. His granddaughter's here, but she'll forgive me if I say he was extrovert. He also had a moustache, which was very useful for extroverts, because you could do a certain amount of this and that, and twiddles. He played the game absolutely to perfection. That is to say, he would be presented with an object, he would say, "My goodness, what on earth can that be?" And then it would go through the whole process, and then it would turn out, of course, that he actually had excavated it. And we used to have a dinner in order that the members of the panel should get to know one another, and there would be mutual warmth before we got into the studio. And mutual warmth, you could get a bottle of 36 mutual warmth, a reasonable size in the restaurant we used. And so we indulged in quite a lot of mutual warmth before dinner. And Glyn was very keen on mutual warmth. So Animal Vegetable Mineral went on its from success to success. In fact, it may come as a surprise to people here that actually Sir Mortimer Wheeler, in, what year was it? 56. Sir Mortimer Wheeler, just think about this, Sir Mortimer Wheeler became the television personality of the year. There you are. I mean, not a pop singer, not a cook, you know, an archaeologist. And he deserved it, because librarians around the country told us, wrote to us in the BBC and said, the shelves on which archaeological books had sat for decades, untouched, had suddenly vanished, were empty. Archaeology became a huge success. Archaeology became a matter of interest to anybody with any intellectual curiosity at all. And it was a sensation. I strayed from the golden path of anthropology after animal, vegetable, mineral, and pursued my own line because I was a biologist and not an archaeologist. And eventually I came into BBC administration. And I was responsible for programs on BBC Two, which was the BBC's new network. And it was then that I thought that we could really build on this huge success that we have and have a department, not only of archaeology but history, in which we would have regular programs that would be headed, of course, by Paul Johnston. And so we set up this unit, and we set up a new series called Chronicle, which was a 50-minute program looking seriously at archaeological digs and archaeological news from around the world. And it was my hope, and indeed it was Paul's ambition, that the BBC then should have a unit which was known in archaeological circles around the world. So that if an important find had been made, like, for example, 3.5 tons of gold or however it was that was just been found recently, that the first people that would ring up before almost anybody would be the BBC unit. And it would happen not only whether it was in Wessex, but whether it was in Guatemala, that round the world the BBC would have a reputation of having the archaeological unit as being the first place where you could get skilled cameramen and knowledgeable producers who would come and help you chronicle and document the process of your dig. And that proceeded rather quite well in the first years. And to increase to a second innovation which we wanted to make was that we should actually conduct an archaeological dig. At least we should supervise or watch an archaeological dig that was timed to a timetable and to criteria which were not television's criteria or timetable, but academic timetables, so that you wouldn't question of you've got to wait until the cameras are there, because we were going to have cameras there all the time. And if necessary, we would keep them there over weeks, and if necessary, we would return in the following season, and so on. So we would conduct archaeology in front of the eyes of the public, with a distinguished archaeologist in control, and people would really understand the process of archaeological discovery. And the first place we decided to do like that was Silbury Hill. Now, you will have heard from what I said that I left archaeology in British television when I left animal, vegetable, mineral. But happily, we've got 3 people here who then worked not only on buried treasure, but on Chronicle, which was the series that followed. And I am going to ask them to join me now on these chairs, so that when you ask me questions about 90% of the BBC's archaeological output, I won't have to answer them, but they will, because they know. So first of all, Ray Sutcliffe. Where's Ray? Anna Benson-Giles, who directed many of the filming programs. And David Collison. David Collison, who was in charge of Silver Hill. And is wearing a Silver Hill tie.
Last one in captivity.
Now then, are there any questions, and particularly about those programs, Chronicle and Buried Treasure, which actually did more than they weren't just quizzes. I mean, they were major archaeological didactic programs. And if you have questions about them, I'm sure that the four of us between us will be able to answer them.
Silbury was a technical challenge, to say the very least.
No.
In 1968, you couldn't get BBC Two in Wiltshire at all. So our engineers rigged an enormous mast about 300 feet high and bolted it to the ground just on the side of the A4. And with some stuff called camera tape, which is very sticky, they got a small black and white monitor and strapped that into the corner of the control van. And they said, right, there you are. When that screen goes blank, you're on the air. And we had no means of keeping in touch with Television Centre whatsoever because, although it was an expensive operation, funds were limited. So technical things that might have made life very much easier in this day and age were simply not available to us. The cameras were cumbersome, but in fact, it's interesting to note that Silbury was the one place where we actually pioneered a small handheld camera.
Television was obviously in its very early forms when these programs were being made, and as has been mentioned, there were problems bringing the objects to life. I believe Daniel and Wheeler used coloured toothpaste at one point. Can you enlighten us to any other of the methods that you used to bring the objects to life?
Coloured toothpaste to bring the objects to life.
Never.
As a
Wouldn't put
special
it past You're not going to spill the beans, are you? You're not going to tell them the toothpaste story, are you?
What is this toothpaste story?
I don't know.
One of them. It's a common misconception that women in the BBC are a rather new phenomenon. In fact, in your day, when you joined and when I joined, it was run by some extremely fierce ladies, including Mary Adam and Joanna Spicer and others.
Every boss I had in the BBC was a woman.
Technology has made it possible now for many of us to make films actually all by ourselves. And it's terrific, except that it suggests that there's no craft involved. Just because you can press the buttons, there's actually no skill. And cameramen who learn about lighting, editors who learn about pace and rhythm, sound recordists who learn about sound, it's not a skill that you just pick up just because you can press the buttons. And I think there's a danger now that we're all so techie mad and we can all do it, but it actually doesn't look terrific half the time because it's not really backed up with proper craft. And I'm sort of a bit like David. I think that the future probably does lie in different forms of transmission apart from television. But I do think we've got to learn and remind ourselves about storytelling techniques. It's not enough just to stick music all over everything or flash frames, or you have to work out what it is you want to say, whether it's today or yesterday. You have to really work. The medium is not the message.
Archaeology has always been extremely controversial, and I wondered if in making the programmes you ever came up against any protests, problems, religious, political barriers.
I didn't hear that. Could you?
If you or we ever came across any religious prejudice or true upsets, I can name one.
Go ahead.
Central Hall, Westminster, with Magnus, after we made a program called The Archaeology of the Bible Lands, which set out with Professor James Pritchard from Pennsylvania to see whether archaeology would make the Old Testament stand up. And frankly, in many cases, it didn't. And when we actually proposed that maybe King Solomon didn't exist, the Christadelphians called a mass meeting of about this many people in the Westminster Hall, and we sat at the back and were publicly called the Antichrist. So,
well, there we are. Thank you very much.